Welcome to a GBA ranking video. If you don't know what the GBA is, the GBA is a competitive Pokemon league. This season, 14 teams drafted 10 Pokemon each, 1 Mega per team, and they go at it week to week with the foreknowledge of what their opponents are bringing and go head-to-head in a traditional sports league style leading up to playoffs and finals matches throughout the season. This video is going to go through the teams and give you kind of a breakdown of what's been going on in the past week and the general season for them and where I think they stack up as far as power goes. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comments, and things like that to help me improve the videos, make them better. And if you have any questions or interested in the GBA, please leave a comment below. Check out the links in the description and go check out the other GBA videos. And we're having a lot of fun this season. That said, let's go ahead and jump right into the rankings. For the first time since the start of the season, we have a new number one team. The Pittsburgh Steelix shoot up the number one. Arguably, they could have been put here last week, considering last week they did beat Arizona. But I just thought that match was a little bit too close to necessarily say that they were the best team in the league. However, this week, getting the season's first 6-0, Swaglift just shows that he's got it. He's been doing two things right this entire season, and it's gotten him to the top, and that's just making all of the right calls, regardless of whether it was luck or fortune or what. He hasn't been over-predicting things like a lot of other teams you've seen. He just comes in and does the right thing. In this instance, you could say it was a lucky move that the Leafeon didn't have taunt on that Thunderous, but it doesn't matter. They didn't. He got a baton pass off, and he swept with a Mega Heracross 6-0. The other thing that Joe's done really well this season is his drafting, his team. His team composition is really well. At the beginning of the season, I was very vocal, and, I had strong concerns that all the expansion teams were going to be at a serious disadvantage because of the shallower draft pool that they had to pick from. But every single week so far that Joe's won, he's done his damnedest to really show that the things he has are absolutely viable competitors, and several other expansion teams are also out there just doing fantastically well with stuff that normally isn't top tier. And Joe from the very start drafted well, knowing where he was coming in at the mega draft and actually planning his mega and building the last half of his team around that was a brilliant stroke. Getting solid one-year contracts that work specifically with the mega was fantastic, and that's exactly what you saw this week. The one-year Scolipede with Swords Dance and Baton Pass Speed Boost works perfectly with Mega Heracross because that's all Mega Heracross needs. It has fantastic coverage, great natural bulk, and amazing offense. So when you throw one Swords Dance and two Speed Boosts on there, it's enough that it speeds most things that aren't Scarfers and can pretty much tear a hole through everything. And again, that's what we've seen this week. As long as Swaglift keeps playing like he's playing, he's going to be at the top for probably most of the season. The San Jose Sharpedos move up to number 2 in what some people would say isn't necessarily the most impressive week, as they did beat a 1-4 team. However, I thought Tom did some really great things, and he didn't just try and power through. He actually brought a significant amount of his own defensive core to really help shut down the fact that Cooper had no real strong offense, and then just paired that with his overwhelming powerhouses of Kieran Black and things like that, because they could have easily been shut down by the pure bulk alone. But when Tom actually has his own momentum and things to come in and give him utility and support, it works a lot better than when we've seen in the past where he's just gone in a more general hyper offense route. I think he's got his head back in the game after that rough loss a couple of weeks ago, and it seems like as long as he can keep his head in the game, he's going to be doing well, and he's making interesting choices. He's got some good trades lined up, and I think it's going to be a good season for the Sharpedos. Number 3 are the Boston Red Sox this week, moving up a spot. They played a great game this week. If you can't tell from his commentary or just from some of the weird sets that he runs and the things that he lives on that surprise you, Superblot puts a ton of thought into his particular builds for his Pokemon. going into detail into the EVs, making sure he has specifically EV'd things to live. You know, he doesn't run very many 252, 252 sets. It's pretty much always some strange mixture that allows him to live or outspeed or KO something that normally you wouldn't expect from. And that kind of thought and just excellent team building, as well as making the right plays, has really paid off for him. He's been doing great this season, only one loss down, doing decently in the differentials, and he's taken out big names, which is actually just incredibly admirable. Not to mention the fact that right now he has the MVP in the league, surprisingly enough, in Hariyama. It's hard to argue with the guy's success, and that's going to be well enough to put him at number 3. Making their first drop out of the first place spot is the now number 4 Arizona Deoxys. 2 pretty sizable losses by teams that were doing reasonably well. Just goes to show that Gubbs might not be ready for a championship this year. He still seems to be struggling with top contender teams, despite the fact that he has a pretty fearsome team. Really, most of what happened wrong this week was just making a few bad plays. He knows the bad plays he made, and I don't think you'll see him make them again. But even then, some of them were just unavoidable things that could have gone either way, making a lot of mind game decisions about whether someone was going to over-predict or just go with a standard prediction, and him making the wrong call. It's hard to fault that against a guy, but in a super competitive league, especially with a lot of teams vying to be in the top right now, you kind of have to hold it against him, and unfortunately, that's going to be enough to drop him down. It would be really easy to say that the Steelix were the best catch-up team in the league so far as of Week 5, but actually I think the best catch-up team is the New Orleans Pelipers, who've moved up to number 5 this week, going 3-2 with a massive differential, tying the Steelix for the number 1 differential in the league at this point at plus 11. Theirs is actually a little bit more impressive when you consider they have one more loss. That means that consistently when they win much bigger, and when they lose by a lot smaller odds. Add into the fact that John came in literally, 3 days or so before the match the first week, didn't get to draft his own team, and it's just impressive. He's really put in the work to understand the team he has, its strengths and weaknesses, and to just come in and plot them. And this week is a great example of that. He basically won at team selection. And not just because he has a strong team. While no one can deny that Terrakion is a monster in this league with just an insane amount of kills, he makes sure that he brings the right Terrakion set to the occasion. He also is just planning well. He broke down the opposing team. He realized Nexus only had one defog option. He hasn't used it as a defog option yet, so it wasn't very likely he was going to. So he came and he just laid down hazards to ruin the Mienshao, because every week it's been Focus Sash. Double that up with Tyranitar so he can bring into Sand to also break the Sash if for some reason he does have a defogger or the hazards can't get set up. Red card ensures a couple of turn of hazards set up. Substitute on the Terrakion is a great play because, again, the only thing that's really going to threaten it is Crobat, which wasn't brought. He just played better. He brought a better team, and he's really showed a great understanding of what's going on in his team. And I think he deserves to be at number 5 for this, and I would expect to see him in that range, if not peeking up into the top 4 again a couple of times, maybe later on. The Saucebucks scoot up again to number 6 this week. Obviously, it's not the biggest win in the world as they beat the now 0-5 Granbulls, but it does just go to show that this is absolutely a different team from last year, not only structurally but mentally. After 2 big losses like they had last week, not necessarily in terms of numbers big losses, but just momentum big losses, it would have been very easy for them to fall into a slump and not come prepared and not win this week. But they did. He brought the right things, and he just played a better game. That's really all it takes. That's all you need to move up. 3-2, solid differential. Saucebucks move at 6. The New York Yankees move up to number 7 this week. It's a solid little scoot up, and it's definitely baby steps. This is a comment I actually left Shady on his video. saying pretty much the same thing. The Yankees are taking baby steps, and it's working for them. They're progressing this season. It's not the massive steps you've seen before, as they still fumble the ball and make a couple of little bit of errors. The first 15 turns of this match were rough, and I honestly didn't think the Yankees were going to pull it out. Just making really odd mistakes, like not going for safe Super Fangs with Golbat and doing, guaranteed 50% damage, and instead going for Brave Bird on things where he still obviously has multiple intimidators and resist to switch in, which is exactly what happened. Along with that, just the fact that he has played the Nidoking so many times at this point, and he knows that every time that Gyarados is there and it's going to wall it. And along with Empoleon, that's two bulky waters that can switch in on any of Mammoth Swine's ice moves short of Freeze Dry. And yet again this season we see him not bringing Freeze Dry. Thankfully, he does acknowledge it a little bit in his commentary, stating that in the future, hopefully he remembers to bring Freeze Dry because he knows it works for him. It's an obvious, predictable switch, and he could easily take out Gyarados every single time with it if he would just remember to bring it. That being said, it does sound like I'm bagging on the guy who won his match, but let me tell you what he did right. Shady, notoriously, if you watch his videos, if you're a fan of him and follow him, struggles incredibly with bulky teams and stall teams. He just never seems to have the mentality and the patience and the wherewithal to pick them apart and break them down link by link. He really struggles, and I don't know that I have ever seen him beat a bulky stall team. And essentially that's what the Nidokings brought this week. They brought a hugely bulky team with their only real offensive option being Weavile. And for the first time, as far as I'm aware of, in his battling career, Shady methodically picked apart a bulky team. Without even being aware that he was playing it the correct way, he absolutely assessed what was valuable on his team, what he needed to keep in to wear down the threats, and what he needed to do to control the momentum. He absolutely shut down Raikou throughout the entire match, never allowing it to do anything, while forcing double switches and things like that, allowing him to just constantly get chip damage. I mean, if you watch the match, it takes probably 8 or 9 switch-ins for that Gyarados to finally go down because he didn't bring Freeze Dry, but eventually he does wear it down, and once he does, it opens a huge door for him, and he just manages to systematically tear the team down after that. He brought the right pokes. He needs to work a little bit more on his set construction and maybe his EV spreads, as I think he's been going a little too standard for this league when you consider how important counter teaming is. But I think if Shady goes back and watches this video again and really, lets it sink in just how he tore down a stall team, this could be a new era for the Yankees, and it could absolutely help them keep moving up. Coming in at number 8 is the Atlanta Hallucas. In the comments for last week's video, someone actually asked me how I decide where things go when they have matching records or things like that, if I just leave it at differential. And I explained part of it's differential, part of it's how well they perform that week, part of it's how strong I think their draft is, part of it is how well I think they are adapting to the format and doing as a whole on the team. And this week's move up for the Atlanta Hallucas is a good example of me not going solely based off record, because record-wise, they are going to be above another team that has a better record than them. However, I think the Hallucas have really turned around from where they were. I think Fizz has really started to grasp a lot of the differerences coming into 6th Gen. He's planning out his teams a lot better, and if it weren't for a Stone Edge, he would have had a 6-0 this week. And, while theory moning and ifs and buts don't really go a long way, a 5-0 against a team that has as many powerhouses and options as the Oklahoma City Thunderous is still incredibly impressive. I mean, when you just look at stats and lineups and the fact that a one Dragon Dance Charizard X could pretty much destroy his entire team, and Fizz managed to luckily bring the seemingly useless Scarf Salamence outside of that Charizard X and win the speed tie, and then just go ahead to continually tear the team apart, speaks volumes about the guy. He's doing work. He's doing the right things these past couple of weeks. As long as he keeps, checking his sets, checking his hidden powers, make sure he doesn't make any silly screw-ups like that. Yeah, I think he's definitely a contender for a middle-of-the-pack ranking, possibly even later on, if he can keep winning big and manage to cut down on his losses, because the only thing holding him back now from being exceptionally well is that he has a very low differential because his losses have been big losses. If he can mitigate that and start, either hopefully, optimally not losing or losing in smaller things like 1 and 2-0 and still keep winning with big 4, 5s and maybe even eventually 6-0s, he could shoot up very far and manage to tie up some records and possibly get into the playoffs if he plays it right. Moving down this week to number 9 is the Oklahoma City Thunderous. This is a rough drop down for them, and it's pretty big. And there's only one reason why I dropped them down as much. It's not getting 5-0. It's just that it doesn't seem like Alex's head is in the coaching game right now. Seems really disenfranchised after that loss last week. He didn't double check his sets, and the Pokemon that he brought some wrong things, and he let himself get dejected and beat. There's no reason why he couldn't have closed the gap and lost by less, or even come back and won, honestly, after losing his Charizard X to a speed tie with Salamence. There's absolutely no reason to give up and throw in that week, and he pretty much did. Negative mind state goes a long way. If you stay in the game and keep thinking you can win, a lot of times you can turn it around. A good example of that is the Yankees Nidokings match this week, where, like I said, the first 15 minutes of that were very rough, and honestly, I think most people watching it would have guessed at that point that the Yankees were going to lose. But Shady kept his head in it and turned it around and won. Whereas this match this week for the Thunderous, Alex didn't keep his head in it. He lost something that he thought was a guaranteed win. He didn't bring the right Clefable, and he just kind of threw in the "Hi, my name is" hat on the table. And that's unfortunate. It's a great, powerful team, but it just seems right now the biggest thing holding them back is mental attitude. Hopefully he can turn that around, because he has a great team, and there's no reason for him to not make it into the playoffs again this year, besides his own, limitations that he's putting on the team. Coming in at number 10 is the 2 and 3 LA Nidokings. Last year's champions, not doing very well this year. Poor differential, poor record. If I had to isolate a problem, I think it's just a lack of variation. I think despite the fact that they have some pretty decent heavy-hitting options, he just seems to be running either a lot of weirdly traditional sets or a lot of bulk. I think every single week we've seen him bring it. Even going into a lot of last season, he's run bulky Gyarados. And while bulky Gyarados is great and does have, its own utility and options, bringing it every week just kind of makes it predictable, and it loses a lot of the value it has. It loses the surprise factor of what kind of Gyarados is it going to be, and you lose out on a potentially amazing Moxie Sweeper or just, anything. He hasn't even been running like a bulky Dragon Dance Gyarados. It's pretty much always been like bulky Taunt or Support or something like that. And when you look at that, it just stands to explain why the team isn't doing very well. They have Weavile. It's an incredibly fast and reasonably decent power hitter, and they've done nothing with it. That thing has a negative personal differential right now, despite the fact that almost every single team that's gone up against it has been terrified of it because it can do so much work against them. And this was another example of another week where it sat on the bench until the final quarters when there was nothing it could do, just like what happened to it last week against Hariyama. I mean, it's possible that Weavile can come out in the last poke or two and run back a sweep, but it's highly unlikely because it's so fragile, and it just seems to sit around and not help create momentum opportunities, and that's just the thing that Nidokings need to fix. They didn't control any momentum in this match at all, which is just insane when you have Raikou as a Volt Turner, and that was a huge pick, which again has done so little. The Nidokings really need to assess their overall team strategy. They have a good team. It may not be as good as last year's, but it's still a very good team. I think they just need to approach the battles drastically differently from what they've been doing this past couple of weeks. The Leafeon's dropping down again. I I mean, when you get 6-0'd, you're going to drop down. When you pass that losing mark, you're going to drop down. That's just how it goes. 2-3, bad differential. They have some serious synergy problems. They drafted what on paper appears to be a very synergetic team. It just doesn't seem to be able to make things work. They do have some trades in the pipeline, some trades that have gone through that I think are definitely going to help the team. Getting rid of the Lucario, which hasn't done a lot of work for them, mostly because they haven't brought it, and bringing in Polito, which I think is going to push them into being just an even more frightening rain team now that they're going to have their own auto weather and not have to struggle to set it up. Hopefully the team's synergy is going to run a lot better for them because it just hasn't been there lately. Without having to worry about running Rain Dance and things like that, I think he'll do better. As you saw this week, Rain Dance was kind of his undoing because the turn he did that was the turn that Swagaloof was able to get off that baton pass to the Heracross, which just swept. Hopefully with these trades, Kote's looking at his team structure a little bit more and figuring out how he can make the whole thing work together. Because so far, outside of Mega Scizor, no one on his team is doing anything. And he just has far too many powerhouses for that to be the case. I hope he restructures his team around his longer-term elements, because he does have a lot of really good long-term elements that aren't doing anything. He's only going to have Mega Scizor for this 1 year, so even if he rides it back up to the top somehow, what's he going to do next year? This really needs to be the time where he focuses on figuring out his game plan for his 3- and 2-year contract players and how he's going to make that work, battle in and battle out. I absolutely believe he can do it. He's still got plenty of weeks to do that, and I really hope he does because I think he's a much better battler than his record is showing right now. Even with yet another loss, I'm going to go ahead and move the Utah Jasmine up this week because I think Cooper's really trying. I think he understands what is wrong with his team. He just hasn't necessarily taken the steps to do it. I'm really going to advise to him and hope he takes into consideration making some trades happen. This has been a huge week for trades in the GBA, and he needs to get in on that and find some more just better offensive options for his team and work out his synergy a little bit better. He is doing more. He is bringing more, non-traditional sets and using things that have offense that normally don't, like Tecmon Top is seemingly growing on him, as well as integrating, things like Volt Switch, Zapdos, etc. into his arsenal. And it's doing well. I think he's getting a lot better at looking at what the other teams are bringing. It's just right now his draft team is outclassed and his thinking is a little bit dated. I think he's another player that needs to play catch up, very similar to Fizzy was at the start of this week. He's going to have to learn that a lot of the 4th gen basics aren't working here. His team is amazingly frightening in 4th gen terms. In 6th gen terms, not so much. It's just a bulky team that people have to pick apart. And overwhelmingly, most of the teams know how to pick apart bulky teams. I absolutely think Cooper can turn it around. I think he's an incredibly great battler. Once he gets it in his head that he's going to have to start adapting and growing his arsenal a little bit more, I think he's going to, and I think his team could end up being frightening again. And I look forward to seeing it. It just might be a couple of more weeks into the end of the season or possibly next season before we really start to see them shine the way they should. I'm dropping the Escavaliers this week down to number 13 because they keep making the same mistakes. They lost this match at the team selection screen, and there's no reason to. Well, I said in the Pelipper's breakdown, it's obvious that Terrakion is a huge threat. It's obvious that Terrakion is better than a lot of the things on the Escavaliers team. That does not mean that he lost this match just because Terrakion was brought. It absolutely doesn't. It also doesn't mean that he lost this match because of the 2 crits. The 2 crits, while they did take things out, should not have been the end-all, be-all. If you look at it, Nexus keeps saying in his commentaries that the GBA is about counter-teaming as hard as hell or something along those lines. But he doesn't do it. He does a very basic counter-teaming, more along the lines of what we see Shady and the Mankeys do, where he kind of gets an idea of what he should bring and then just keeps bringing standard sets or non-standard sets that aren't tailored to the situation. I mean, if you look at it, he lost this match because he didn't think about the fact that Deoxys-T was going to set up hazards and that he would need defog on Crobat. He lost because he didn't bring Hyper Voice on Gardevoir, which there was no reason not to bring Hyper Voice on Gardevoir. It's becoming a pattern and a habit that every week Gardevoir does not have the very obvious coverage or stab move that it should have. And that's just unnecessary. When your Mega Gardevoir is not necessarily a top class Gardevoir, you need to make sure you're bringing the right one to offset, it being a little bit weaker in some other aspects. And he's just not doing that. He's not a bad battler. He just seems to be a bad planner. There's no reason not to run Trick on Rotom. Just if he had done that, then in the opening turn, he would have absolutely stalled out the Deoxys-D, setting up hazards for the rest of the match. Or he could have come in later on after the Terrakion showed Substitute. Sorry about that. And switched to Scarf when he got an open opportunity and really kind of hurt its viability. Though Scarf Terrakion is going to be scary, it would have made it a little bit less inclined to do what it was going to do. Nexus is really going to have to start doing his homework on these things and double checking his sets. There's no reason not to run Hyper Voice on Gardevoir pretty much every week. I mean, it's just bad planning. That's all there is to it. While he doesn't have the best team in the league, you can make things work. A Hariyama is MVP right now. So saying you have an ass team or that your team is outclassed physically is not an excuse at this point. You just have to plan better and then play to your best ability in the actual match. Crits or no, Nexus lost this match of his own accord. Staying at last place, the Chicago Granbulls, 0-5, terrible differential. I said during the draft and in my initial draft concerns that the dual weather was going to be a problem. It's a split focus on a team that needs direction. Kyle's not a bad battler by any means, but he needs to focus on things. And this week's another example of that. He knows he needs to focus on things, but he still tried to bring multiple options, and it just doesn't work, and he just got beat. Fortunately, the Granbulls have some trades in the pipe that I think are going to work out really well for them, managing to lose their Rain Core to some extent, but bulking up the Sun Core a little bit and just giving it a better general feel of a cohesive, synergetic team, which I think is really going to help them out a lot. Trying to split was not a good idea, especially because so many other teams have the option of running Rain just as well as he did. It was never going to be good. I mean, he was never going to win a match against the Leafeons if it came down to them in the final somehow, or things like that. There's two decent sand teams that can shut that down and not have to worry about things. So him just focusing on building a more cohesive team, especially in a longer stretch, I think is going to help a lot. He is still kind of locked into the Sun team theme for a couple of years with that 3 years Ninetales contract, but who knows? In the end, he could trade that, or he might not have to. I think you're going to see them struggle for another week or two as they settle into the trades that they have, get a more lined-up team, but hopefully they're going to start picking up some wins later in the season with a more unified direction coming from them. It's a good team, and it's a team that I think is going to get better. I think multiple teams are going to benefit from this, and it's going to make it a more competitive league. But unfortunately, right now, they're still in last place until they manage to turn it around, which I do expect them to do. With that said, go ahead and stay tuned. I'm going to do predictions up next. Alright, looking at next week's matches, first up is going to be the Chicago Granbulls at Boston facing the Red Sox. Going to give this to the Red Sox. Nick's been playing a great game. His team could have a couple of problems with some of the things that the Granbulls might bring. However, the Granbulls just haven't been playing their best so far this season, and I'm not sure that this is going to be a huge turnaround week for them, as the Red Sox have generally been playing pretty well. So I'm going to give that to them, fairly confident. Next up is going to be the Los Angeles Nido Kings at Arizona Deoxys. Going to give this one to the Deoxys, despite coming off of 2 losses back-to-back, just like the Nido Kings. I think Deoxys have a better team. Historically, the Nido Kings are 2-0 career-wise against the Deoxys, with Gubs never managing to beat them. But I think they have a better team. I think the Nido Kings have less of a good team this year. And I think Gubs is just going to be hungry for a win after 2 very close, frustrating losses and going against someone he hasn't beaten before. Third match of the week is going to be Milwaukee Sawsbucks at the San Jose Sharpedos. This is a pretty close match, actually. Oddly enough, the Sharpedos have a lot of power and the Sawsbucks have a lot of bulk. And it's going to be interesting to see how that goes down. I'm going to give this one to the Sharpedos because they do also have the added benefit of just having their own bulk and good core and Ferrothorn and Mandibuzz back there if they need them, as well as hard hitters like Kiram and such. I think it's going to be a close match. I don't see this going any higher than a 2-0 for the winning team. And I really do think it could go either way. I just give a slight edge to the Sharpedos just based off quality of team, more so than anything else. Next up is going to be Oklahoma City Thunderous at the New York Yankees. I'm going to give this one to the Thunderous. I think the Yankees overall have a more consistently solid middle-of-the-road team, but I think the Thunderous are probably fairly hungry for a win at this point, having, suffered a pretty bad loss this week and a not-so-great loss the week before, whereas Shady's been riding pretty high in his matches and is going to be coming back from vacation. And I think you might see a little bit of that early season Shady struggling that he is known to do. So I think the Thunderous are going to take that one. Next up, Pittsburgh Steelix at the Escavaliers. Steelix hands down. Nexus doesn't really have as strong a grasp of the format as it seems some of the other people do. Pair that with a somewhat weaker draft team. Not that much weaker than the Steelix, honestly. The Steelix also have a very rough team, but Swagle's just been able to do amazing things with them for the, ever since his first week loss. He's turned that team around 180% and is blowing past everyone in wins and differentials, being the top team in the league right now. So I can't see him losing this week to the Escavaliers, barring just something insane happening or Nexus having a real awakening as far as understanding what he has to bring to the format. Next up, Toronto Maple Leafeons at Atlanta Hallucas. I'm going to give this one to the Hallucas. I think Fizz has really finally wrapped his head around the concept of the league and what kind of thought process has to be brought to it. And while I think Kote has an understanding of the league, I don't think he has an understanding of his own team synergy. Despite having a very threatening and on paper much better team than the Hallucas and better than some of the people he's gone up against, he hasn't seemed to be able to get all of the parts to synergetically work and has relied on Mega Scizor to carry him through almost all of his wins. And I think if the Hallucas can really, pinpoint that aspect and lock it down and figure out a way to take out Mega Scizor, they'll have a pretty easy time winning that match. Last up is the Utah Jasmine at the New Orleans Pelipers. Pelipers all the way. The Jasmine have a bulk team, but the Pelipers have some of the hardest hitting things in the league, and John has done more than catch up as far as his planning and familiarity with his own team, shooting right up there to the top of differential and doing very well with his own stats. Not in the lead, but doing damn well. I can't see him having too much of a problem breaking through Cooper's defensive core. I think it'll be a pain, and it's going to be a much longer match than what he's been going up against. But I think he's got the power. I think he's got an understanding of the format, and I even think he has his own bulk and some opportunities for some solid, safe switches in there that'll really help him round everything out and win it. That's going to be all my picks for the week. Sorry I didn't have any last week, just time constraints and things like that. But do leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the matches for the week, how you think they're going to go down, and I will see you next week.